Greetings. I think this video is going to exceed the time limit, so if you're one of these people with a short attention span, well, I guess you'll be missing the rest. It'll probably be in two parts, but it's a complex topic and an important topic. I want to talk about the state of affairs with regards to advanced reproductive technology. So let me just start by talking about where we actually are in terms of progress. Now, my point of reference, there could be several, but I want to keep this kind of simple. This is off the cuff. I'll post a link to the article. It's a radical feminist article, pretty much radical, heavily feminized article, if you will. But it's interesting. It's an interesting read because it talks about two different perspectives coming from feminists with regards to reproductive technology or advanced reproductive technology. Now, as far as actual stuff that's gotten done, things or progress that's been made, there really, I mean, as they cite in the article, there are really two major steps forward, or the two major sources cited as progress are one, gentleman by the name of Dr. Yoshinori Kuwabara, and my Japanese is nigh non-existent, so apologies, of Shutendo University, and he successfully gestated some goat embryos in a machine that holds amniotic fluid. And the other one, closer to home for some of you, is a female, it's a very Chinese name, so I'm assuming she's Chinese, Dr. Helen Hongqing Liu, director of the Reproductive Endocrine Laboratory at the Center for Reproductive Medicine and Infertility at Cornell University. Most of you know Cornell, it's pretty famous. And that was back in 2003, and she managed to grow a mouse embryo, almost a full term, by adding bioengineered tissue and extra uterine scaffold and some other supplements. And even more recently, apparently, she managed to grow a human embryo for about 10 days in an artificial womb. But her work is limited by legislation, go figure. So that's another blockade, if you will, or another damper in it. But she's working on this. She's fully devoted to the idea of ectogenesis, or birth outside the womb, the external womb. Now, these are the two primary examples. So it's not a question of a question of if, but it's certainly a question of when. It's going to come. But what's interesting about the feminist take on this, on reproductive technology, is that there are essentially two camps. Now, one camp you have already heard. Now, from, say, Barbarossa, he cited some passages from Dworkin. And she talks about the possibility of such things, artificial womb particularly, as being very dangerous to women because it takes their primary asset to human beings, their primary trading chip, if you will, that is vessels of reproduction, away from them. And I'll be talking about that a lot more extensively. Now, there are other perspectives on reproductive technology or advanced reproductive technology, such as artificial wombs. Now, the late radical feminist Shumalith Firestone, who was one of a kind, she wasn't dumb though, in this book, her book called The Dialectic of Sex, basically implied that the artificial womb would simply get rid of the tyranny of biology imposed on women, and I suppose it would. Of course, she put it under this, the usual radical feminist patriarchal structures, blah, 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 biology being employed against them. So they're really kind of two camps, and I think these, from what I've read and gathered, that these two camps have remained pretty firm and solid in their division as to who wants artificial womb technology and who doesn't. But I think ultimately, as we've seen in the recent video by Barbarossa on surrogacy, that the camp that recognizes women's primary and virtually only asset, their reproductive capacity, is probably the camp that's going to win. Because for all their bloviating and guffawing and women are so great, this and that, feminists in general, they always go back to the trading chip, abortion rights, out banning surrogacy, and when it comes to reproduction, they have an iron tight grip on that. So I think the camp that represents the Dworkian school of thought, if you will, with regards to artificial reproductive technology, will ultimately win out. Because remember, women are afraid. They're perpetually afraid. It's probably a genetic thing. They're afraid of everything, even though they're even less so than children, the group in society least affected by violence, even less so than children. They're more afraid than everyone. They're more afraid of violence than children or men, and men being the ones most affected or the least afraid. So, there's a consequence and a legacy of our evolution. But that fear, the fear of loss of control, reproductive control, will ultimately, I think, drive the debate within the so-called feminist community to the Dworkian school of thought. Because let's face it, let's be honest, women for decades now get an ample opportunity to prove themselves the quote-unquote equals of men, to make the same kinds of advances, to engage in hard labor. They can work on, if they wanted to, if they're capable, they could work on oil platforms in the North Atlantic. They could work in the mines of Western Australia, earning good money at the risk of their health. They could do that, and they're not doing it. They could also become top-notch engineers, and a few of them have, but not many. Certainly not by the numbers that feminists might wish they had. Hence, why there always needs to be more work done in the name of feminism for the sake of women. So let's face it, at the end of the day, men have built civilization with their physical strength and their mental prowess. We wouldn't be having this conversation now if it weren't for the ingenuity and the endeavors of men. And women have, in large measure, been passive, standard buyers, as it were. They've just been standing by and letting it happen. To take away that one particular and arguably truly salient ability of women is to essentially remove their utility. That's why in the feminist camp, the Shumilith camp, the one that thinks that artificial womb technology is gonna get rid of the biological tyranny. Well, yeah, it could. But the fear, which, feminism has as its primary motivating factor fear, since women are afraid of everything, that's probably going to win out in the long run. Now, there's an entirely different element to this discussion that involves, men, basically. It's what I really want to focus on now. So even though I do think the Dworkian school of thought, the fearful, we don't want the men's to get control of reproductive technology, is ultimately probably going to win out. Even when artificial womb technology becomes reality, I think the fear, as usual, is unfounded. And why? Well, look at men. You see, men have no collective identity like women do, and I'm not suggesting we should, but everything that feminism is, as Barbara has said many times, this perpetual advocacy machine, and it represents all of womankind, whether women consciously accede to that or not. It represents the interest of women above all else. And men have no such mechanism. So before moving on to the artificial womb and the possible consequences of that, I want to talk about, say, male birth control, that is the male pill. Now, mind you, I've talked about this before, but there are really the female reproductive physiology is several leagues more complex than the male. That is to say that the male pill could have been with us decades ago, prior even to the female pill. But we don't see it. As it stands now, as a male, you have a couple of options. You have condoms, vasectomy, which is an invasive procedure, or the use of synthetic steroid compounds, which the quantities of which you'd have to use to render yourself temporarily infertile make it impractical, and a lot of people don't like sticking needles in their quadriceps, glutes, or their deltoid. So, these are just not good options to have. The pill, I think, unlikely will not become reality, because men don't see themselves as a collective, and they don't represent their interests. Men throughout history have internalized their own disposability. I mean, remember what I said, that the guy from AVF said, I'm okay with being disposable as long as I get some goodies for it. Okay? So this is the internalization of disposability, of male disposability. The interest is not there in a male pill. I mean, I hate to sound the cynic, and I hate to sound negative, but quite frankly, the interest is not really there, because if it were there, men would have pushed for it. And at the end of the day, money talks. I mean, if men would pay for it and wanted it en masse, they would develop it. Even, I believe, contrary to the wishes of feminists and women at large, if the money were there. And the money would be there if men had a pronounced interest in it, but they don't. You see, this is the problem. Men internalize their disposability. They don't really advocate for themselves on any plane of existence. I mean, look at healthcare. They don't take care of themselves. They have no interest in having extra research done for the sake of male-specific diseases or male primary diseases. Prostate cancer, it's a very prominent example. Men are more affected by coronary disease, and yet